Special thank you to our sponsor, iGenX. iGenX isn't just a small business. It's a powerhouse ally ready to tackle your agency's toughest tech challenges head on. Specializing in low-code, no-code solutions, advanced analytics, and project management, iGenX is your go-to partner for both federal and commercial projects. But what sets iGenX apart? As a Salesforce Summit-level partner, the company brings unparalleled expertise across the entire Salesforce ecosystem. From MuleSoft and Einstein and Tableau, the expert teams at iGenX don't just build solutions, they engineer them, crafting robust data pipelines and creating stunning visualizations that drive real results. At iGenX, success isn't just a goal, it's a promise. The team is dedicated to delivering measurable benefits that transform your operations. Ready to partner with iGenX? Contact the team at info@igenx.com, spelled info@eigenx.com.
A piece of advice, that free advice that I give to like a lot of companies as they think about good products, for example, is to think about like who the community is that's going to be using the product. What are they hoping to accomplish? What are the goals, and how do you foster that sense of community? When you find those spaces where something actually like works and really lands, that's magical.
Welcome to GovCom Unfiltered, where your journey through the labyrinth of federal contracting begins. I'm Alexa Choi, your guide and host on this epic adventure. Here, we dive deep into the heart of government contracting, shedding light on the heroic tales of those who navigate its complex terrain. Our mission? To bring you closer to the action, revealing the critical steps, triumphant victories, and occasional pitfalls that our intrepid adventurers face. Your journey into the world of government contracting starts now, and we could not be happier to have you with us. Let's embark on this adventure together.
Today's guest on GovCom Unfiltered is Dave Z. I don't try to pronounce his last name because it's a good one, but honestly, one of the more exciting conversations I think I've had to date. I've been dying to interview him, and I'm super excited. So thank you so much for being here. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you. So I'm Dave Zvenyach. I go by Dave Z. So one thing about my last name, it is in fact pronounceable. There's like the low bar and here's the high bar. So I'll start with the low bar, which is that when I worked for the DC Council, my most famous client was Marion Barry. And Marion Barry used to refer to me as Mr. Spinach. So if you can do better than Mr. Spinach, you're fine. That's the low bar. The high bar is Zvenyach. And the way that I describe this is like, you remember Sven from Frozen? Sven, if you can say, imagine him having an itch, right? Like imagine the animal having like itch, that's Zvenyach. That's me. I'm Dave Zvenyach. So great to be with you, Alexa. I'm super, super pumped to chat with you today.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you for that. And as somebody whose last name is regularly butchered, I had a boss call me Bok Choy. Honestly, she told me that in meetings.
Unbelievable.
And then she cut it just to Bok. She'd be like, hey, Bok, how are you today? And I was like,
wow,
I was still in my 20s. I put up with a lot.
Look, as a fellow member of like the vegetable crew, I really appreciate that. I can see you, but it's not great.
Bok choy and spinach. Well, along those lines, let me jump into my first question. My first question is, who are you? How did you get here? I know you are a unique unicorn breed of govy, lawyer, software developer, magician. I mean, how do kids even describe what you do for a living? I just can't wait to hear this story.
Well, let's see. I'll start probably at the beginning, and I'll try to keep it relatively short. So yes, I am an attorney by training, though I'm not practicing law anymore. I started my career in DC coming out of GW Law School, and really thought that I was going to at one point be a patent attorney. I had a mechanical engineering background. I was like, I'm going to be a patent attorney. But along the way, I had a couple of pretty significant moments. First is that while working as a law clerk for the National Science Foundation Inspector General's office, I really caught my bug for public service. That was the first sort of moment that I had the opportunity to work with government, and it was incredible. And given the opportunity after law school, I worked for the judiciary for a couple of years as a law clerk, and then moved back to DC to be the chief of staff to a DC council member. And that was an extraordinary experience. Got to, as will be relevant in subsequent parts of this interview, I got really interested in government contracting and got to work on DC's procurement reform legislation, led a number of investigations into DC's procurement practices, and eventually ended up as the general counsel to the DC Council for a number of years, where I got to work on just like a huge range of topics, everything from like Medicaid to potholes. So it was pretty wild. But along the way, I started writing software. Just like, working as a lawyer, working as a, doing my day job.
As you just pick it up.
Just, slinging some Python code. It was great. And it was one of those things where at first it just seemed like a hobby and something that was interesting. And then right around the time of healthcare.gov, a number of colleagues that were coming into the government in various different ways, all trying to think about how do we prevent subsequent healthcare.govs. That was a sort of the motivating conversation. But it was instantly, for me, not really focused on the negative. It was like, well, how can we use technology to really improve public experience? How do we really improve the outcomes for people inside the government and for outside of government? And so I had the incredible opportunity to join 18F at the General Services Administration in 2015. And that has been that was the start of my federal career. Up until then, I'd been really sort of in state and local. And joining GSA in 2015, I had a bunch of different things that I was able to do there. I was the 18F, original 18F sort of individual contributor focusing on acquisition policy and practice, helped a bunch of different agencies as they went through procurements and post-award management, served as the 18F director for a year, worked in the Federal Acquisition Service as the Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Systems Management, and most recently was the Director of Technology Transformation Services at GSA, which was pretty extraordinary. And in between then, I worked as a partner and director at a venture capital studio, and now I work as the principal at TandemGov. We could talk about that later. So that's my story, kind of windy, everything from government contracting to software to law and back again. So
I love it. And if anybody's listening that was a part of 18F when it first landed, I know that I was. My company was like, yes, let's submit a video, talk about our cool stuff. And then Brent Matavia, who I also love, was like, nope.
Yep. It was a really interesting time. And I mean, one of the things I really am super grateful for is that moment, there was a lot of openness to thinking about different ways of doing procurement. So I was the sort of person responsible for managing the 18F the BPA. At the time, it was just such a wild idea. It's like going to evaluate vendors based on their technical presentation and price and nothing else. There was no technical volumes. There was no, and everyone's like, can you do that? And now, technical demos are, part of the landscape. And there's a lot of conversations about how we can really try to use acquisition innovation techniques. It's been pretty cool to be part of that conversation.
Are you still part of those conversations? Is that something that you still align to today?
I will say that I am, as I told a colleague yesterday, I'm like constitutionally required to say yes to any conversations about acquisition innovation. It's just like, it's impossible for me to say no. I'm like the moth to the flame. So
yeah, we've read your LinkedIn posts. We'll get into that in a minute because I have questions I have written about that. So let's rewind a little bit, just like a tiny bit. What did you want to be when you were like 5?
So it's actually a good question. I asked my mom, I was like, what did I want to be when I was 5? And she didn't know. She knew what I wanted to be at 3 and I wanted to be at 6. And so I'll tell you what those things were and then you can evaluate from there. So at 3, I wanted to be a firefighter. Like that's
most
what I wanted.
2-year-olds do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to be. At 6, I wanted to be a lawyer. So somewhere along the way, things changed. So
I want to know how you were smart enough to know what a lawyer was at the age of 6.
Well, so it was pretty straightforward. I apparently love to argue, and basically that they're like, you can make a career in argument. And so that was like, oh, that seems great. I can just do this all the time and get paid for it. That seems lovely. Let's do that. What's funny is that I actually think, I don't know what I wanted to be at 5, but I'm going to guess that what I was most excited about at the age of 5 was probably building with Legos. And so I kind of think that was actually the thing that if I understood that you could make a career building stuff, I would have probably chosen that.
Well, if you think about it, you build software and so you have to build your dreams, which makes
it. I'm here. Let's go.
Yes, I love it. Well, so give me a couple of the highlights of your government career. I heard a rumor, maybe it was sitting next to you at a dinner, possibly, that you were somewhat involved with getting your hands dirty with Sam.gov. And anybody on the government side or the industry side has strong feelings about Sam.gov, and usually not along the loving, positive feelings. So I would love to hear your involvement so we know who to chase down. Just kidding.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, it's true. I did work on Sam.gov actually at multiple points. You sort of prepared me for this question, and I've been trying to think about what the highlights of my career are. And so I have to admit, I think that there are way too many things that I'm super proud of and like that I worked on that to name, but I will identify a few contracting specific, right? So reading the room, knowing that we're talking about government contracting, here are a few of the sites that I was able to work on. So I did in fact work on Sam.gov as part of the beta.sam.gov early part of that transition. I worked from about 2017 to into 2018 on sort of the movement from 10 different systems into what is now Sam.gov, the consolidated Sam.gov. But had worked on that. Worked on USAspending.gov and sort of the launch back in 2015 to 2017. I had various degrees of responsibility with helping Treasury in the launch of USAspending.gov. Worked on calc.gsa.gov. That was one of the pricing tools. Got to work on that a little bit.
A lot of people don't know that exists either to this day, and it is such valuable information.
Super useful. If you're doing any pricing, you absolutely need to be looking at calc. I worked on the GSA forecast tool, which was one of the first efforts to bring agency forecast into a centralized place. I also worked on FOIA.gov. So those are just some of the things that I worked on at various times in government. But I mean, honestly, it's probably hundreds of .govs that I've worked with over the years.
Wow, that's an impressive list.
It's also probably reflective of the fact that there are too many .govs, but that's a story for another conversation.
Totally different conversation.
Yep.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, this actually dovetails nicely into my next question, which was, what are you doing now?
Yeah, so I am, as I mentioned, I'm a principal at TandemGov. We are a consultancy that help government contractors or would-be government contractors navigate federal contracting. And I work with a couple of colleagues and a bunch of great clients and help try to make sense of this this wild world that is federal procurement.
Well, I can't tell you how many people have hit me up personally saying, do you know of anybody that has any experience with the TTS?
Yeah.
I'm like, I have a guy. You are my guy behind that. I have a, because I can't think of anybody better to put in front of that question than you.
Well, look, I think one of the things that I think about a lot and I'm super grateful for is that there's just an incredible community of folks that are part of TTS and around TTS. People that came before me and the people that are still there today are just incredible humans and they're doing amazing work. So for the periods that I've had the opportunity to work with them, it's been just a real privilege. And I'm to this day ever grateful that that I had the opportunity to contribute in that way, and definitely have learned and learned from my experiences at GSA. I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to contribute.
Awesome. All right, let's pivot into some GovCom Unfiltered content.
Yeah, let's go.
Talk about your LinkedIn shenanigans. I personally, anytime I get a bing on my computer that's like, Dave, see you posted on LinkedIn, I'm like, okay, hold on. Let me go read this. Let me comment, because I don't think anybody else is writing, like, number one, anything is funny and is entertaining, but also is like impactful. Right, because you're kind of tying all that together and putting it out there. Sometimes you're calling the government out. A lot of times you're calling the contracting community out. And then at the end of it, you're just like, this is a wild, wild industry, which I love. So talk to me about like how to come up with your topics. What inspires you?
So this is a great question. And it was, I thought a lot about what was my motivation for writing this thing in the first place. And it really came down to, I had felt when I left government in 2022 and was thinking about what I wanted to do next, I had felt that one of the unfortunate aspects of government contracting specifically is that everyone takes themselves very seriously. Obviously, look, government contracting is a compliance-heavy environment. Obviously, it's a very difficult and challenging, ecosystem. Fine. But there tends to be this behavior and sort of expectation and cultural expectation that the only way you're supposed to talk about GovCon is in like very stiff, sort of highly scripted, highly, sort of uptight ways, right? Everything is like, oh, we want to win. And we're so great to partner with government, and government's like, oh, we're so deeply innovative and, we're so careful. But if you talk to folks that are actually doing stuff on the ground, everyone's like, it's a mess, y'all. Like, we're just trying to get by, And so I just felt like there was this massive disconnect in terms of how people behaved and people's expectations, and then the way that people talked about it. And so I felt like, at this particular moment in time, I was in a space where I didn't have any sort of obligations to anybody other than to just write sort of authentic, my authentic perspective on the space. So I started writing it, and I was like, this is going to be an irreverent newsletter. Not everyone's going to like it. In fact, when I shared it with a couple of colleagues early on, their advice to me is like, well, you need to make it shorter because it's too long. People won't get it. People won't read it. And I was like, if the point here is that you're taking this because like you're going to walk away with a nugget because like I've boiled it down into like the topic sentence for you, like don't read it. That's cool. I want to engage the topic. I want to think about it. I want to expose it for the silliness that it is. But then I also want to take it seriously in the sense that there's a reason why when you spend $1 trillion, stuff is hard. It should be hard, right? This is a really difficult space. There's a lot of reputation, a lot of money. There's a lot of outcomes that are at stake. And so it has to be taken seriously and taken, you can't just be like, government sucks, blah, government contracting is terrible. Like that's not a good story to tell. And it's just a false story to tell. So trying to write in a way that is authentic, amusing. I don't want to write something that's boring. And so trying to write something that was fun for me to write and to challenge myself to really to read between the lines and sort of understand why is this happening? Why is this going this particular way? Is kind of fun for me too. So yeah, that's the story there.
Well, anybody that knows me knows we are here for a good time, not a long time kind of vibe. Pitbull all day long.
Let's go. I love it.
Say what you want, man. Come on, right? I mean, I would say that we're not building bombs or delivering babies, but I'm sure there are people in the government world that are doing both of those things.
Well, totally. And I mean, this is just kind of the thing that I think is great is that the government procurement rules effectively apply irrespective of what you're buying. It is everything from, buying bombs to buying pencils and everything in between. And I think it's cool that the government has such a wide range of needs and there's such a wide range of companies that are able to participate and also to examine like always able to achieve the best outcome. So like what are the ways that we can improve?
Right. Wow. Well, really inspired and excited that there are other people that are living on the authenticity line of professional and unprofessional, just having a good time out there pushing people's buttons.
I think it's great. And I will say I've been really, really impressed by the thoughtfulness and care of so many people that are also writing. So that there are people that are putting stuff out there into the universe. I'm thinking about like Guy Verlake. I'm thinking about like co-prints. I'm thinking about a lot of folks that are putting some really interesting thoughts out into the space. And I'm just excited to be able to read that. And I like to think that the overall ecosystem is getting funnier. Hopefully I was able to contribute in a small way to that.
Awesome. Well, you definitely are. And I think we are getting funnier. I read a book recently about how being funny is actually contributes to people thinking you're a better leader. When I read that research done by like scientists, I was like, oh, it's over for y'all. We're about to get real funny.
Yeah, I wish that I had more deeply understood that over the years. I think as you get deeper into leadership, again, you fall into the trap that they fall into, and I know so many people do, which is that as you become more of a leader, you're sort of okay. Well, this is the expectations that have become more stiff and scripted, and so I wish I had that article before becoming a leader and been able to hold to that. But I think the thing that has been really in the same vein, I think being funny also requires you to understand the topic. It's hard to make fun of something if you don't really get it. Otherwise, you're just being a jerk. And so really trying to like understand something deeply is a big part of being funny, I think.
Yeah, and you also have to read the room too. There's always that. I can't say I've never told a joke and had it land incorrectly and be like, well.
Yeah, as it turns out, sometimes jokes aren't funny. And you have to be open to that feedback and stop telling the bad joke.
Exactly.
Federal proposals, your voice, less time, exceptional results. Voltron gives you the power of custom language models to reduce proposal development costs by 54% and start to finish submission time by 63%. Voltron is the only AI platform that synthesizes the valuable business development and capture information you obtain to write high-quality compliant proposal content specific to your company in each solicitation. Stop throwing it over the fence. Schedule a demo today at vultron.ai.
You can't have a conversation these days without the words AI. It's a requirement nowadays. What are your vibes on AI and what's next for us as humans, do you think?
Yeah. Well, what does it mean for humans? I think that actually is up to us, right? So what I mean by that is I'm a big believer that technology is not neutral. That, a lot of times folks are like, oh, it's just, I'm building the technology and then I don't care about the use case. I'm just like trying something cool into the world. And I don't play that game. Like, I think that technology exists within a social context. I think that it exists to ultimately to help people, and it can be used to hurt people. So I think a lot about AI as being an incredible technology as a potential force for good, but it also is going to have a lot of negative and both intended and unintended consequences. I mean, I do think that AI as a technology has as much of an impact, if not more of an impact, than the internet. And the internet obviously is pretty extraordinary. We're able to have this conversation virtually, bring goodness to obviously your billions of listeners. Like that is a good thing. On the other hand, the internet has led to a lot of really negative consequences. Everything from the impact of social media on not just kids but adults too, and to all kinds of negative consequences associated with health impacts and more. And so, like, you can't just say it's going to be all good or it's going to be all bad. I think we as people have choices to make and obligations to make sure that the technologies that are delivered ethically and responsibly, and are tended to when they have both, again, intended and unintended consequences.
Yeah.
But one thing that I'll note on a slightly different philosophical slant is that the government, I think, sometimes is underestimated in terms of its contributions and use of artificial intelligence. My favorite examples of this, sort of recent examples of this, is that there's a big data set that's been used for things like computer vision called MNIST. And so if you're doing like an AI like class, at some point you're going to come across the MNIST. And it's basically like handwritten like numbers, right? So it's like, is a 3 a 3, a 5 a 5? How can you tell the difference? How can you classify the numbers to be a 3 or a 5? MNIST was a data set that was actually compiled, you can guess, based on the government. NIST was involved, right? So you've got NIST as the agency that was helping create this data set. But it's actually one step further, which is that the MNIST data set, the people who created it were tabulators from the Census Bureau. And so the Census Bureau was one of the earliest creators of technology. You may have heard of IBM. IBM grew out of efforts from the Census Bureau, like this long history of using compute to help improve government. And computer vision, has that sort of work has played out into real life applications in government for many years. So, for example, the reason that I was thinking about MNIST is I was thinking about optical character recognition and the fact that the U.S. Postal Service was using optical character recognition in 1965. Just like think about how mind-blowing that is.
Wow.
We hadn't gone to the moon yet. We're using effectively AI and classification methods at that time, right? So like everything from like the weather predictions and weather service, and a wide range of applications in government. And I think sometimes we tend to focus on, using this flavor of AI, or they're not, they haven't implemented chatbots in the right way. It's like, okay, government actually has a long history of being pretty innovative and both a creator and adopter of technology. So I think that's an undertold story about how the government has been a participant in the innovation and then innovation space. And obviously for AI, it's been at it for a long time.
One of the reasons why I love you so much, Dave, is because you're very hopeful of a person, and you're also optimistic. And I think that the way that you just told that story is something that needs to be said more often. Say it louder for the people in the back, because I was on the call just this morning talking about the VA, and I was talking about how the government is a risk-adverse entity who focuses more on that than innovation. Well, as that might be true, it's not like those innovations don't exist out there. Like what you just mentioned, two of the most unsexy agencies, U.S. Postal Service and Census, but being two of the most impactful agencies out there.
Correct. That's right. Yeah, and I wouldn't sleep on VA as being an innovator either, right? Like I think one of the things that innovation is not always evenly distributed, right? So there's this famous quote, I think it was by William Gibson, who said, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." I think that's true within government, right? Like innovation's there, it's just not evenly distributed. So part of this is thinking about how are you making sure that the right innovations are spreading in the best way.
Right. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Question. What is your favorite part of building something? And also, what is your least favorite part of building something? The software and...
Yeah. The least favorite is when it doesn't work. Like when you're like, I built something, it's going to be awesome, and it doesn't work. And I think building something that doesn't work, where I probably feel the most amount of latent frustration, is when something you've built that's cool isn't used. I think a lot about like sort of the desirability aspect of good product. It's like, oh, this might be desirable to me, but not desirable to many users. And so like combination of different what they call like desirability and viability and feasibility, and it's like it might be a viable thing, it might be a feasible thing, but it's not desirable. And so like I think part of this is when you build something that it's like, oh, this is going to be really cool, and it's just like it's a flop, like it's a bad joke, that sucks. But I think the best part about building something is the creative aspect, the exploratory work. Imagine a better and different way of doing something, and then finding both the resources to do it and the community around it to make it work. I think that's the most gratifying part of the work. Piece of advice, the free advice that I give to like a lot of companies as they think about good products, for example, is to think about like who the community is that's going to be using the product. What are they hoping to accomplish? What are the goals, and how do you foster that sense of community? When you find those spaces where something actually like works and really lands, that's magical.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a question that wasn't on the list, and
yeah,
it might throw you for a loop, but
okay,
I think you're ready for it.
Hit
So
me.
I'm a big fangirl of FBO, and
Mhm.
the younger folks listening to this are going to be like, "In the city, I never even heard about it." What? No, listen, FBO is FedBizOps.
Yeah.
And it was the system before Sam.gov, and it was really ugly, but it was awesome. It always worked, and it had some really cool, unique functionality that even Sam.gov to this day doesn't have. What ideations happened that you know of that kind of helped the facilitation of the building between FBO and Sam.gov? Going back to your human-centered design statement.
Yeah, I think there's like a meta critique that I want to offer here, which is that I think part of the problem with FBO, with Sam.gov, the state of play as it exists today and as it existed during the transition, that we need to do more to invest government around user-centered design and really deeply understanding what the motivations and goals are. And maybe before I talk about sort of the limitations of FBO, it's helpful to think about why USA Spending was a success when we launched USA Spending. So USA Spending as an implementation of the Data Act between 2014 and 2017 was like technically the first government-wide agile delivery project. And there's a lot of reasons why, from a purely tech perspective, it's impressive being able to take all the data sets from all the different agencies, create a data standard, bring those data standards into like a common interface, and like all that's like a good tech story. But I think the undertold story about USAspending.gov is how much energy and effort went into deep user-centered design and user research to understand how people were trying to use the tool. And so one example, right? If you go to USAspending.gov right now, one of the charts that you'll see is the idea of growth of a number of awards, or changes in the number of awards. And I promise you, most people in GovCon have looked at that and been like, that's useful to me. And that didn't exist at an entity level before USAspending.gov. And that came from sort of interviewing folks, saying, what are your motivations? What are your challenges? What are the things that you're aiming to accomplish? And it wasn't just like, here's the list of awards, which you'll see so often. Here's the list of awards, but without that context, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? Right. The last 12 months, right? That little line at the beginning is a big deal.
What you're talking about, yeah.
That's something that I think people, when they go to USAspending.gov, now they've come to expect it. But at the time, it was revolutionary in terms of the feature set. And I think one of the challenges with the transition from FBO to Sam.gov, and where Sam.gov, I hope, is going to adjust over the years, is recognizing that in this moment in time, simply having all of the information presented to you without any context, without any sort of sense of like why this matters to me or how it's relevant is not great. One of the features that I'm pretty sure was an FBO that I think is not really present in today's Sam.gov is just like, who else is watching this, right? So like as you're putting together your PWin, you're like, hey, I used to have a sense of like how many people are paying attention to this thing. I need to know, is this going to be an opportunity I'm actually likely to win, or is it an opportunity I'm not likely to win? And you don't get that context anymore at Sam.gov. And I understand why, right? Like the reason why that might be useful or not useful for the governments to be hosting. But it certainly is a feature that I think a lot of people used to really appreciate about FBO that today isn't present. And so I think as we think about user-centered design, and as we think about some of these tools that are out there, it's understanding what are the motivations of the users, how can you present that, or recognize that you can't, and then find other ways to make it valuable.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to say that as far as I'm concerned, I am a huge fangirl of USA Spending. That site, I don't think I could do my job today writing reports and double checking things without it, because it really is my system of record for double checking different things. And then the second thing is Sam.gov is okay, but eBuy is the worst.
Yeah.
You and I should get together and put an unsolicited proposal together for and say,
yeah.
let us redesign eBuy because this is a massive conundrum.
Yeah. Well, and I do think, I mean, not to over-index it, there are some incredible humans at GSA that are trying to make better outcomes there, or platforms like the eBuy and beyond. I do think that one of the broader critiques that I would level against sort of the acquisition platforms ecosystem, that it's really been built around agencies' needs as opposed to the broader public's needs. eBuy accomplishes what an agency needs, real well. It's just that if you're a member of the public, it doesn't quite serve you. In fact, like as a member of the public, I can't access the information on eBuy. And so broader critique is that you think about the constituencies, so you think about the stakeholders, you think about the users, there tends to be a sense of like, well, my current immediate users are happy, without thinking about that broader set of users that are dissatisfied.
Right. I love it. Well, we are going to migrate into the last two questions that I ask everybody.
Okay.
First question is, if somebody was watching you and inspired by you, which I'm sure there are a lot of them out there, what two pieces of advice would you give somebody?
Yep. So one piece of advice is advice that I got at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, is for blisters. What that means, a lot of times people are encouraged to follow their passion. What are you passionate about? Honestly, this might seem surprising to you, given sort of my enthusiasm in the conversation. I'm actually not all that deeply passionate about government contracting, right? I know this sounds crazy. I care about a lot of things around government contracting. I care about the, sort of the outcomes. I care about the people, those things. But like, actually, like really love part 8.4. No, I don't actually. I'm not like passionate about 8.4. There was a moment where I was like, just is this my passion? Like, I don't know. I'm not all that motivated by it. I was reading this article that said, follow your blisters. And what that meant is rather than trying to like know what makes you sort of emotional, it's like, where are your calluses? Like, what are the things that you find yourself going back to and doing and finding sort of that moments of joy and finding that flow. And for me, it was all about government contracting, right? This is a space that I find myself back into. Every time I do it, I find myself doing more work and sort of saying yes to more work. That's a sign for me that this is a space that I should be more deeply in. So following your blisters, not your passion, is a piece of advice that I took myself and I think that I'd encourage others to consider. Second piece of advice that I would give is to embrace the system. And I know that sounds silly because you talk about innovation all the time, right? So it's like, it's like disrupting the system. And I actually learned that to do anything meaningful, including disruption, you have to deeply understand and deeply embrace the system. And so for me, as we think about GovCon specifically, it's so complex. There's so many layers. There's so many different ways that things work and don't work. And to really be able to contribute means that you have to go like many layers deep, and to constantly be curious about why does something not do that, or why did you get this outcome? I would have expected that other outcome, and learn to love the edges before you start to worry about changing anything.
Great advice. Both of those are tremendous. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Question: what is your superpower, and how did you find it?
Well, it follows actually from that second piece of advice, which is embracing the system. I think my superpower is that I'm just very curious, always wondering why something did work or didn't work. At some level to a fault, right? Like you can sort of analyze things too far. I find myself constantly in a situation where something doesn't perform the way that I would expect it to perform, or something doesn't do what I'd expect it to do. I'm just like, that happened. Like, why is that? Superpower is that I'm able to sit with that lack of knowledge and lack of sort of understanding, and not feel sort of threatened by it, but feel motivated by it. To say, I really don't get this, that's a good thing. There's something that needs me to spend time and energy more deeply understanding. That I think is my superpower, is that ability to be curious and to sit with uncertainty.
Well, I think any Buddhist out there would tell you that sitting with uncertainty is, like one of the main tenets of being human and evolving, and as well as being curious. I mean, that's a big one, right? So I really appreciate you. Catch us next time on GovCom Unfiltered. But for today, thank you so much, Dave Z. Actually,
Yeah.
Zvenyach, I did it. You did such a good job explaining how to pronounce it. I'm there. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me. It was a total blast.
As we draw the curtain on today's chapter of GovCom Unfiltered, I want to thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey through the intricate world of federal contracting. I'm Alexa Choi, and it's been an honor to navigate these stories of courage, innovation, and resilience with you. Until we meet again, keep pushing boundaries, exploring new horizons, and making your mark in the government contracting universe. Farewell for now, but not forever. Stay tuned for more adventures that await in the next episode of GovCom Unfiltered. Safe travels on your path to greatness, and remember, we are all on this journey together.